Imagine the agony of a family whose loved one simply disappears. No note, no explanation, just an empty space where a vibrant life once was. For countless families in the Seattle area, this nightmare became a reality. But behind these disappearances was a predator far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Join us as we unravel the twisted mind of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, and explore the decades-long hunt for a man who preyed on the vulnerable and left an indelible scar on a region. Warning: this video details the horrific crimes committed by Gary Ridgway. While we aim to provide an accurate account, we want to emphasize that the focus remains on the victims and the impact of these tragic events. Please be advised that the content may be disturbing. Viewer discretion advised. Gary Ridgway entered the world on February 18, 1949. He was born in Salt Lake City, Utah. He was the second of three sons born to Mary and Thomas Ridgway. His childhood home wasn't always peaceful. Relatives have described his mother as a very controlling person. Even at a young age, Gary witnessed frequent and intense arguments between his parents. His father worked as a bus driver, and those close to the family remember him often expressing his disapproval of sex workers. Discipline in the Ridgway household was often physical. Gary and his brothers faced corporal punishment from their mother. Belts or sticks were used, even for minor offenses. Later in life, when speaking with defense psychologists, Ridgway revealed some disturbing inner turmoil from his adolescence. He confessed to experiencing conflicting feelings towards his mother, both anger and sexual attraction. He even admitted to having violent fantasies about killing her. Academically, Ridgway faced challenges. He was dyslexic, a learning disorder that affects reading. As a result, he was held back a year in high school. But his struggles weren't limited to the classroom. At the age of 16, Ridgway committed a shocking act of violence. He stabbed a 6-year-old boy. Thankfully, the child survived the attack. Ridgway had lured the young boy into a wooded area. He then stabbed him through the ribs, with the knife piercing his liver. Later psychological evaluations recorded Ridgway's IQ as being in the low 80s. In 1969, a new chapter began for Gary Ridgway. He graduated from Tyee High School, stepping out into the world with the promise of adulthood. That same year, at the young age of 19, he married his high school sweetheart, Claudia Craig. Shortly after, duty called. Ridgway enlisted in the United States Navy. He was deployed to Vietnam, serving aboard a supply ship. Though not on the front lines, he witnessed the harsh realities of combat firsthand. During his time in the military, Ridgway's personal life took a troubling turn. He frequently engaged in sexual encounters with sex workers. This led to him contracting gonorrhea. Despite the illness and his anger at having contracted it, Ridgway continued these unprotected encounters. His marriage to Claudia, barely a year old, ultimately crumbled under the strain. Years later, after his arrest, those who knew Gary Ridgway painted a complex picture. Friends and family described him as friendly, yet there was always something strange about him. His first 2 marriages both ended in divorce, a pattern fueled by infidelities on both sides. His second wife, Marcia Winslow, revealed a darker side to their relationship. She claimed that during one instance, Gary had put her in a terrifying chokehold. Interestingly, during his marriage to Marcia, Ridgway underwent a significant religious conversion. He became deeply devout, proselytizing his faith door to door. At work and at home, the Bible became a constant presence, often read aloud by Ridgway. He insisted that Marcia adhere strictly to the teachings of their pastor. Paradoxically, despite his newfound religious fervor, Ridgway's inner demons persisted. He continued to solicit the services of sex workers. Even more disturbingly, he pressured Marcia to engage in sexual acts in public and inappropriate locations. Some of these places were chillingly close to where the bodies of his future victims would later be discovered. According to the women who shared their lives with him, Ridgway possessed an insatiable sexual appetite. His 3 ex-wives and several former girlfriends recounted his constant demands for sex, often multiple times a day. His desires were often unconventional, with frequent requests to have sex in public areas or secluded woods. Ridgway himself admitted to a deep and troubling fixation with sex workers, a relationship marked by both lust and hatred. He would often complain vehemently about their presence in his neighborhood. Yet, he regularly sought their services. In a chilling statement read at his plea hearing, Ridgway confessed his hatred for prostitutes and his resentment at having to pay them for sex. Some have speculated that Gary Ridgway was a man torn between his powerful sexual urges and his deeply held, albeit perhaps selectively applied, religious beliefs. Despite the turmoil in his second marriage, Gary and Marcia had a son together. The 1980s and 1990s became a period of unimaginable terror in the areas surrounding Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. Unseen, a predator was at work. Gary Ridgway is believed to have murdered at least 71 teenage girls and women during this time. The true number may never be known. In chilling court statements, Ridgway himself confessed that he had killed so many, the faces blurred, the count lost to the darkness of his actions. The majority of these horrific acts occurred between 1982 and 1984, a concentrated period of intense and relentless violence. His victims were often the most vulnerable, sex workers and runaways he encountered along Pacific Highway South. These were women already on the fringes, often overlooked. Ridgway employed a chilling tactic to gain their trust. He would sometimes show these young women a picture of his own son, a deceptive display of normalcy to disarm their caution. Once they were with him, the encounter would follow a horrifying pattern. After minutes of intercourse from behind, Ridgway would unleash his deadly grip. He would wrap his forearm around the front of their necks, using his other arm to pull back with brutal force, strangling the life out of them. Most of these murders took place in the mundane settings of his own home, the cab of his truck, or in secluded, isolated areas. The bodies of his victims were callously discarded in the wooded areas surrounding the Green River, near the Seattle, Tacoma International Airport, and other desolate dump sites scattered throughout South King County. Tragically, his reach extended beyond Washington state. 2 victims were confirmed, and another 2 suspected, to have been found in the Portland, Oregon area. The bodies were often left in clusters, sometimes posed in a disturbing manner, and almost always nude. In a truly disturbing revelation, Ridgway later admitted to returning to the bodies of his victims. He engaged in necrophilia, a desecration of the deceased. When questioned about this, Ridgway offered a chillingly pragmatic explanation. He claimed that having sex with the deceased reduced his urge to kill, limiting his need to seek out living victims and thus lessening his chances of being caught. In a further attempt to evade detection, Ridgway would contaminate the dump sites. He would leave behind seemingly random pieces of trash, gum wrappers, cigarette butts, even written materials belonging to others, hoping to mislead investigators. He even went so far as to transport the remains of a few victims across state lines into Oregon, a calculated act intended to confuse the police and complicate their investigations. July 1982 marked a grim turning point. The body of Gary Ridgway's first known victim was discovered. A seemingly insignificant detail at the crime scene held a crucial clue. A unique type of spray paint was found on clothing wrapped around the victim's neck. Tragically, this paint was not tested at the time. It would remain unexamined for 2 long decades. Had that simple test been conducted in 1982, the connection to Gary Ridgway might have been made much sooner, potentially saving countless lives. As more bodies were discovered, for more victims in quick succession. The chilling reality of a serial killer gripped the region. In response, the King County Sheriff's Office formed a dedicated unit, the Green River Task Force. Their mission: to hunt down the monster responsible for these heinous crimes. Among the key members of this task force were Robert Keppel and Dave Reichert. In a desperate attempt to understand the mind of a killer, they turned to an unlikely source in 1984. They periodically interviewed Ted Bundy, the notorious serial killer already behind bars. Bundy, with his own twisted understanding of such crimes, offered his insights. Bundy shared his opinions on the psychology, motivations, and behavior of the unknown Green River Killer. His dark expertise proved surprisingly insightful. He suggested a disturbing possibility: that the killer was returning to the dump sites, driven by a morbid desire to engage in sexual acts with his victims. This chilling theory would later prove to be horrifyingly accurate. Bundy also offered a grim piece of advice. If police discovered a fresh grave, they should stake it out and wait, for the killer might return. Adding another crucial layer to the investigation was FBI Special Agent John Douglas, a pioneer in the field of criminal profiling. Douglas meticulously analyzed the available evidence, developing a profile of the suspect, a psychological blueprint that would help guide the task force. Ironically, Gary Ridgway himself had brushes with law enforcement during this period. He was arrested in both 1982 and 2001 on charges related to prostitution. He first became a suspect in the Green River killings in 1983, following the disappearance of 18-year-old Marie Malvar. Marie's boyfriend and her pimp, desperately searching for her, discovered a truck parked in front of Ridgway's house. They believed it was the same truck she had boarded the day she vanished. This led to Ridgway being interviewed in connection with Marie's disappearance. Over time, police received several other tips and pieces of information that pointed towards him. Yet, despite the growing suspicion, in 1984, Gary Ridgway took a polygraph test and passed. This apparent confirmation of his innocence would allow him to continue his reign of terror for years to come. Around 1985, a new relationship began for Gary Ridgway. He started dating Judith Mawson, a woman who would become his third wife in 1988. Years later, in a 2010 television interview, Mawson would recount unsettling details from the early days of their relationship. When she moved into his house while they were dating, she noticed something peculiar. There was no carpet. Detectives later shared a chilling theory with her. They believed Ridgway had likely used the carpet to wrap the bodies of his victims. In the same interview, Mawson described Ridgway's work routine. Some days, he would leave for work very early in the morning, claiming he was going in for overtime pay. Looking back, Mawson speculated that Ridgway must have committed some of his horrific crimes during these supposed early morning shifts, using the guise of work to conceal his dark activities. Mawson claimed that she had absolutely no suspicion of Ridgway's monstrous double life before authorities contacted her in 1987. In fact, she hadn't even heard of the Green River Killer because she simply didn't watch the news. Ridgway himself later stated that during his relationship with Mawson, his kill rate decreased significantly. He even claimed that he truly loved her. Of his 49 known victims, only 3 were murdered after he married Judith Mawson, suggesting a chilling influence, or perhaps a temporary lull in his horrific compulsion. In a statement to a local television reporter, Judith Mawson offered a startling and perhaps naive perspective. "I feel I have saved lives by being his wife and making him happy." The wheels of justice, though slow, were beginning to turn. In April 1987, police took crucial hair and saliva samples from Gary Ridgway. These seemingly routine samples would later prove to be the key to unlocking the truth. They were subjected to the emerging science of DNA profiling, a technology that would ultimately provide the irrefutable evidence for his arrest warrant. The day of reckoning arrived on November 30th, 2001. Gary Ridgway was at the Kenworth Truck Factory, the very place where he worked as a spray painter. Unbeknownst to him, the police were closing in. They arrived at the factory to finally bring him into custody. Ridgway had been a suspect in the murders of 4 women nearly 2 decades prior, initially identified as a potential person of interest. But it wasn't until 2001 that the advancements in DNA technology provided the conclusive link. DNA left at the crime scenes, painstakingly preserved, matched the saliva swab taken from Ridgway years earlier. The original indictment named 4 victims: Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Carol and Christensen. Later, 3 more names were added to the indictment: Wendy Caulfield, Deborah Bonner, and Deborah Estes. A meticulous forensic scientist had identified microscopic spheres of spray paint, a specific brand and composition used at the Kenworth factory during the time these women were killed. The paint, a seemingly insignificant detail, now served as another damning piece of the puzzle, further solidifying Ridgway's guilt. By August 2003, the long shadow of the Green River Killer investigation seemed to be shifting. Seattle television news reported that Gary Ridgway had been moved from the intense security of King County Jail to a minimum medium security facility in Airway Heights. Other news outlets soon followed with reports of a significant development. Ridgway's legal team, led by Anthony Savage, was reportedly finalizing a plea bargain. The terms of this potential deal were staggering. In exchange for a full confession to a vast number of the Green River murders, Ridgway would be spared the death penalty. The news sent ripples of anticipation and anxiety through the community, especially among the families who had waited for so long for answers. On November 5, 2003, the speculation became reality. Gary Ridgway stood in court and entered a guilty plea to an astonishing 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. The plea bargain, a difficult decision for many, was now official. In exchange for avoiding execution, Ridgway agreed to fully cooperate with authorities, providing crucial details and, most importantly, assisting in the location of the remains of his numerous victims. In a statement accompanying the guilty plea, Ridgway offered a chillingly matter-of-fact account. He stated that he had killed all of his victims within King County, Washington. He also admitted to transporting and dumping the remains of the 2 women found near Portland, Oregon, a deliberate act intended to confuse the ongoing police investigation. Deputy Prosecutor Jeffrey Baird acknowledged the weight of the agreement in court, noting that the deal included the names of 41 victims who would not be the subject of State versus Ridgway if it were not for the plea agreement. These were lives that might have remained unaccounted for without Ridgway's cooperation. King County Prosecuting Attorney Norm Malling explained the agonizing decision to accept the plea bargain. He acknowledged the desire for justice, but also the limitations of the evidence at the time. "We could have gone forward with 7 counts, but that is all we could have ever hoped to solve. At the end of that trial, whatever the outcome, there would have been lingering doubts about the rest of these crimes. This agreement was the avenue to the truth. And in the end, the search for the truth is still why we have a criminal justice system." Gary Ridgway does not deserve our mercy. He does not deserve to live. The mercy provided by today's resolution is directed not at Ridgway, but toward the families who have suffered so much. On December 18, 2003, King County Superior Court Judge Richard Jones delivered the sentence. For each of the 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, Gary Ridgway received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, to be served consecutively. Adding to this already staggering punishment, He was also sentenced to an additional 10 years for tampering with evidence for each of the 48 victims, tacking on a further 480 years to his multiple life sentences. Tragically, the count of known victims would rise again. Later, after the remains of his 49th victim were discovered, he would receive yet another life sentence. True to his agreement, Ridgway began leading prosecutors to the long-lost remains of his victims in 2003. On August 16th of that year, near Enumclaw, Washington, the remains of a 16-year-old girl were found just 40 feet from State Route 410. These remains were positively identified as belonging to Pammy Annette Avent, who had long been suspected of being a victim of the Green River Killer. In September 2003, the remains of Marie Malvar and April Buttram were also recovered, bringing a measure of closure, however painful, to their families. The grim discoveries continued. On November 23, 2005, a weekend hiker stumbled upon the skull of one of the women Ridgway had confessed to murdering in his 2003 plea bargain. Just days earlier, on November 20, 2005, a man hiking in a wooded area near Highway 18, southeast of Seattle, made another heartbreaking find: the skull of Tracy Winston. Tracy was only 19 when she disappeared from Northgate Mall on September 12, 1983. This discovery was the catalyst for Ridgway receiving his 49th life sentence, a stark reminder of the lives he had so carelessly extinguished. Even decades later, the echoes of Ridgway's crimes continue to surface. In 2023, remains discovered in 1985, known only as Bone 17, were finally identified as belonging to 15-year-old Lori Ann Raspotnick, who was last seen by her family in Lewis County, Washington. In November 1982, Gary Ridgway confessed to more confirmed murders than any other American serial killer. Over 5 grueling months of interviews with police and prosecutors, he admitted to 48 killings, 42 of whom were already on the police's list of likely Green River Killer victims. Beginning on February 9, 2004, county prosecutors began releasing the videotaped records of Ridgway's chilling confessions. In one taped interview, he initially told investigators that he was responsible for the deaths of a staggering 65 women. In another taped interview, on December 31, 2003, Ridgway's admissions grew even darker. He claimed to have murdered 71 victims and confessed to having had sex with them before ending their lives, a horrifying detail he had withheld until after his sentencing. In his confession, Ridgway offered his chilling motivations. He acknowledged that he specifically targeted prostitutes because they were easy to pick up, and chillingly stated that he hated most of them. He further confessed to engaging in necrophilia with his victims' bodies after murdering them. However, he claimed that he began burying his later victims specifically so that he could resist the urge to commit this final act of desecration. In January 2004, with the legal proceedings largely concluded, Gary Ridgway was moved to the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. He was placed in solitary confinement, a stark isolation reflecting the enormity of his crimes. Over a decade later, on May 14, 2015, Ridgway was transferred out of state to the USP Florence High. This federal superax prison, located east of Cannon City, Colorado, is known for its extreme security measures. However, this out-of-state transfer sparked a significant public outcry in Washington. Concerns were raised about the accessibility of Ridgway for any future investigations into unsolved murders potentially linked to him. Following this public pressure and discussions with Governor Jay Inslee, Bernie Warner, the Corrections Secretary, announced in September 2015 that Ridgway would be brought back to Washington. The stated reason was to ensure he remained easily accessible for ongoing open murder investigations. On October 24, 2015, Ridgway was transported back to Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla from USP Florence High via a chartered plane. His return marked a renewed focus on potentially uncovering more of his victims. Then, in September 2024, a surprising and unexplained event occurred. Ridgway was briefly transferred from the Washington State Penitentiary back to the King County Jail for a few days. Authorities offered no public explanation for this temporary move, fueling speculation and intrigue. Ridgway was then transferred back to the Washington State Penitentiary, leaving the purpose of his brief stay in King County shrouded in secrecy. The mystery surrounding Ridgway's temporary transfer to King County persisted until March 2025. It was then that the transport order was unsealed, finally revealing the purpose behind his brief return. The unsealed order disclosed that Gary Ridgway had been temporarily moved to King County to assist authorities in a renewed effort to locate the remains of more of his victims. Even years later, the search for the missing continued, with Ridgway himself being utilized in the grim task of bringing closure to more families. The story of Gary Ridgway is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can exist among us. But as we close this chapter, let us not forget the names and the lives that were so tragically cut short. Their stories deserve to be remembered, and our thoughts remain with their families who have endured unimaginable pain. May their memory serve as a constant reminder of the preciousness of life and the importance of vigilance.